If you want to get in your red Bibles or any other Bible you have and turn to Proverbs 31, that's where we're going to be today. Oddly enough, and the red Bibles is actually on page 1031 where it begins. So Proverbs 31. For the last several weeks we've been in a series entitled Wonder Women, in which we've been looking at the story of several women in the Bible who left lasting impressions on us in one way or another. We began, if you might recall, with a woman named Deborah, who was a naturally gifted, divinely appointed leader, able to step up at a time when it was every man for himself in the land of Israel, and none of those men seemed qualified enough in God's eyes to adequately lead. She was known as both a judge and a prophetess. And through her fearless and bold leadership, God delivered the people of Israel from the oppression of another people who had way more advanced weaponry and a more powerful army. After that, we talked about another woman named Esther, who eventually became a queen. But if you recall, her rise to royalty wasn't exactly by means of a fairy tale love story you might see in a Hallmark Christmas movie. It began as a result of a nationwide draft, so to speak, in which the king's men rounded up every available young virgin to be entered into a contest of sorts to win the king's favor and become his new wife. And there were no points for second best. There would only be one winner, and the rest were basically destined to be love toys known as concubines for the king. However, God providentially made the Jewish Esther the favorite in the Persian king's eyes. And this set the stage for Esther to be in a prime position to rescue the nation of Israel yet once again from the reach of a vengeful man named Haman, who had become the king's right-hand man. After that, we've covered the story of a childless woman who suffered ridicule at the hands of her husband's other wife. She felt defeated and miserable because she couldn't seem to get pregnant. Some of you may have known what that feels like, or at least know people who do. And then after much pleading with God, she struck a bargain with him, and she stuck to her end of that bargain. She gave birth to Samuel, and she dedicated him for lifetime service to God, in not the pre-temple days, so it would have been in the tabernacle. But as a result, God blessed her with more children. And then last week we looked at the story of Abigail, a woman who was trapped in a marriage to a successful, wealthy, yet vile, disrespectful husband. She most likely suffered, at the very least, emotional and verbal abuse. But in spite of that, when her husband put himself and all of his servants in danger of a retribution, revengeful anger from David because of Haman, or because of her husband's harsh insults and dismissive response to a request for food, Abigail went to David to appeal for forgiveness and mercy. She even took the blame upon herself, even though she had nothing to do with it. And she appealed to the implication and credibility of David's divinely appointed kingship in the near future if he did act out on that. David took it to heart. He admired her courage and her wisdom, and he relented his pursuit. And then shortly thereafter, Abigail's husband died, and David married her. And there she became pretty much a princess or a queen of sorts. All of these women came from different experiences and different backgrounds, but all were godly, well-respected women whose stories left formidable imprints on the readers for centuries and millennia to come. However, today we're not going to look at a story of another Wonder Woman in the Bible, even though there are still plenty more we could choose from. Instead, we're going to dive into a passage that is the blueprint of what it takes to become a Wonder Woman in God's eyes. Now, if I'm being completely truthful, this is not just a blueprint for women. It's really a blueprint for men as well. I've often counseled younger single men, especially when working with some of the students at ISU at FCA, that if they really wanted to marry a queen, they needed to keep in mind that queens marry kings, right? In other words, men need to strive to be worthy of the woman they want to spend their life with. If you want to marry a queen, you need to be a king. And this is the same advice the mother of a king once gave to her son. Following that advice, she laid out for him what to look for in a woman. She instructed him to look beyond outer beauty and to seek a woman who lived a life worthy of royalty in marriage. To find a Wonder Woman, that's what she wanted him to do. And then she described such a woman. And we have this blueprint in the very last chapter of Proverbs 31. Now, ideally, in retrospect, I kind of wish I was tag teaming with the female speaker this morning, to be honest, because I feel more than a bit unqualified to speak on how a woman can live in such a way to become a Wonder Woman. I think it would come across more credible from a woman's perspective. Nevertheless, I appeal to the authority of Scripture and the thought that God has laid on my heart from the resources and input of other teachers in regard to this topic today. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you has come from women's perspective in my research. Before we get to the Wonder Woman section of this passage, though, I want to take a look at the wise word that the mother of the king counsels her son with on how to be a king worthy of such a woman. beginning in verse 1, it says, the sayings of King Lemuel, and by the way, we don't really know who that is. Some think it was the king of another country. Some think it was another name for Solomon. We don't really know. But King Lemuel or Lemuel, in fact, it's probably Lemuel, to be honest with you, because El is the word for God in there. So King Lemuel contained this message, which his mother taught him. She said, O my son, O son of my womb, O son of my vow, do not waste your strength on women, on those, at least those kind who were in kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel, to guzzle wine. Rulers should not crave alcohol, for if they drink, they may forget the law and not give justice to the oppressed. Alcohol is for the dying, and wine for those in bitter distress. Let them drink to forget their poverty and remember their troubles no more. Speak up for those who cannot speak up for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and the helpless and see that they get justice. So the advice this wise mother gives to her royal son basically amounts to two things. First, don't take your position lightly and waste your opportunity frivolously as a ruler by being self-indulgent, and in this case, drunk. Instead, respect yourself, respect your position, respect your opportunity to impact others by being clear-headed, wise, and just. Now, this isn't just wise advice to a king, it's wise advice to every man. Every single one of us is in a position of influence, not only with our spouses or our children, but also with the community around us. Our credibility must always be taken and protected seriously. And how we conduct ourselves privately and publicly reflects not only on ourselves, but also on those whom we love and those from whom we desire respect. The New Testament speaks into such values quite a lot, especially as followers of Jesus. For example, Paul wrote to the Philippians saying, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And likewise, he wrote to the Colossian church saying, conduct yourself with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how to respond to each person. We actually looked at that verse in Sunday school this morning. In other words, he's saying, remain sober and protect your credibility. That's kind of what that verse is saying. But the Apostle Peter spelled it out even more emphatically, writing in 1 Peter chapter 1, therefore prepare your minds for action, keep sober in spirit, fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts that were yours in your ignorance. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves in all your behavior. Now the second thing the wise mother instructed her son to do is to practice justice and mercy toward those who were oppressed. In other words, look out for the little guy. Serve the underserved. Listen to the one that everyone else tunes out. Whenever possible, shoulder some of the burden of those who are weighed down and are at a disadvantage because they don't have the resources of the more powerful and influential. In other words, don't just scratch the backs of the ones who can scratch back. Scratch the backs of those who have no arms with which to scratch back. Now, teachings like this were very present in the words of Jesus all over the place. Perhaps the most memorable is the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want to be treated, regardless of what they look like or what kind of background they come from. Don't show favoritism. And let's not forget the story of the Good Samaritan as well. After these very wise words to her son, though, the king's mother goes on to give him the most important advice of all, saying, choose who you will spend the rest of your life with wisely. The rest of the chapter speaks of a woman of noble character. And although it primarily speaks of what it takes to be a wonder woman in the context of marriage, it is also the blueprint of what every woman should strive for in terms of character and priorities and personality. Among Christian circles, this is called striving to be a Proverbs 31 woman. In the original Hebrew, beginning in verse 10, it is written as an acrostic, as a Hebrew acrostic poem, meaning that each verse begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So every verse there, if this were written in English, would begin with an A, the next one would begin with a B, the next one would begin with a C, but this is in Hebrew. So with that, let's begin reading, then I'm going to stop and comment every so often every few verses. Beginning in verse 10. Who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She is more precious than rubies. Her husband can trust her, and she will greatly enrich his life. She brings him good and not harm all the days of her life. Now, one writer said that the Proverbs 31 woman is first and foremost trustworthy and dependable. Her integrity fosters a deep sense of confidence and security in those around her, and no one more so than her husband. She is someone whose words are reliable and whose actions speak louder than any promises that she can make. She is the kind of woman who always has the back of her loved one rather than always trying to go behind his back. And I would say the opposite of that is true. Always have the backs of the person that you love. Again, I want to point out that while this passage is speaking specifically to women, the same principle runs true of all of us men. Our word means something. Our action means something. The one thing a godly husband desires more than anything from his wife outside of a solid faith is her respect. But if he desires it, then he must be worthy of it, must earn it. If either husband or wife is going behind the other person's back, it compromises the credibility and the power and the foundation of the whole. On the other hand, if we prove to be trustworthy to one another, we greatly enrich each other's lives and our own. More importantly, we greatly enrich the kingdom of Jesus by modeling a godly marriage without any regret. Moving on, in verse 13. She finds wool and flax and busily spins it. She is like a merchant ship bringing her food from afar. She gets up before dawn to prepare breakfast for her household and plan the day's work for her servant girls. She goes to inspect a field and buys it. With her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She is energetic and strong, a hard worker. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. Her lamp burns late into the night. Now, it's important to keep in mind here that while the specifics of this poetic appeal for godly women were written relative to ancient times, the underlying principles in them are timeless. And with that in mind, in regard to this part of the blueprint, one writer wrote that the Proverbs 31 woman is hardworking and resourceful. She's portrayed as someone who does not shy away from labor, whether it's in managing her household or running a business. Her dedication to her work enables her to provide for her family and to contribute to her community. I think another way of putting it is a godly woman is industrious and busy rather than being an insolent or an indolent busybody. Now, I'm not of the belief that a woman's place is in the kitchen, as some antiquated men might proclaim. But I do believe that God has uniquely gifted and equipped most women to be tremendous multitaskers, more so than men in most endeavors. I'm constantly amazed by you women, how you can have 10 things going on simultaneously. I really am. I consider myself fairly organized with a decent memory for certain things, but I do not hold a candle to most of you ladies. Now, both Jennifer and I were very fortunate to grow up in homes where our moms were able to be at home for the most part. And the saying is true, they weren't housewives, they were homemakers. And I'm very grateful for that. However, in today's society, most couples do have to have dual incomes in order to attain and maintain a certain lifestyle, should they choose. One of the things I've always admired about Jennifer, really from the get-go of our relationship, is that she has an incredible work ethic at whatever job that she has had, as well as a deep sense of loyalty to that job. It took great convincing on my part years ago to get her to kind of take a step out in faith, and when we lived in Florida, to challenge her to make a career change when it seemed like she was being taken advantage of more than she should have been at her current job at that time. She finally did, and once again, she proved herself valuable. In fact, so valuable that just 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, her old boss and her husband, who had since retired, were traveling through here and wanted to have dinner with us. And I heard her boss say that Jennifer was the best employee she ever had. And I'm proud of that fact. And I'm proud of the fact that we instilled together a tremendous work ethic in both of our girls. As I look around here this morning, I'm equally proud to be among all of you, because you all emulate the same kind of work ethic that we hold in such high regard. Whether you work outside the home or together on the farm, or one of you works for a paycheck and the other works to create a balanced home life. It's amazing how rare that really is, to be in a group of women and men just like this. So I thank you for the example you are to me. And I think what's important to realize that whatever role we are called to play in making a home, that each one doing their part must recognize it as an act of worship. Paul said as much in his letter to the Colossians when he wrote, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. This you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ that you are serving." So it is an act of worship, whatever we do. Moving on to verse 19, it says, "Her hands are busy spinning thread, her fingers twisting fiber. She extends a helping hand to the poor, she opens her arms to the needy. She has no fear of winter for her household, for everyone has warm clothes." Now, in this particular poem, our heroine here seems to have a gift and a passion as a seamstress or dressmaker, along with some other household items that she creates and makes. That would have been very common in those days. A woman with strong ingenuity and a good marketplace sense would even sometimes turn that into a business. You might recall in the book of Acts, there was a woman by the name of Lydia who was identified as a maker and seller of purple. Beyond that, however, a godly woman, according to the king's mother in this poem, would leverage her skills as a conduit of compassion and generosity by using her giftedness to not only serve her family, but others as well. I got to be honest with you, in churches today, I get so frustrated at people who take the giftedness and the skill that God has given them, the ability to do things, and they'll do it all day long for a paycheck, but trying to get them to do it in the church is just almost impossible. I don't get it. That was the number one reason why God does give us our gifts. So I love the fact that we have people here who use that giftedness, whatever it is, not only in the in the terms of the business world or the whatever world they're in, but also in terms of the church. Now this conduit of compassion, this ability to serve her community, was not done at the expense of her own family's well-being, because she was a careful planner and she made sure that they were always taken care of, even in the harshest conditions. That's why they had clothes during the winter. Nevertheless, her heart for others extends beyond just her immediate circle, reflecting the love of Christ through a spirit of serving and modeling for her children even further a life of selflessness. Moving on, it says she makes her own bedspread. She dresses in fine linen and purple gowns. Her husband is well known at the city gate. You like that one, don't you? I saw you look up when I said the word purple. Her husband is well known at the city gate where he sits with other civic leaders. She makes belted linen garments and sashes to sell to the merchants. Now, the underlying principle here is because of her dedication to godliness and the wise use of her giftedness and her attitude of generosity, it is implied that God blesses such hard work and kindness with enough financial blessing to be able to enjoy a few finer things in life. Now, this is not a gospel of prosperity, but rather a demonstration of the principle of reaping what you sow in this life. It's what happens when both work hard and don't sit on their duff all day. That's what the king's mother wishes for her son to see. Saying, son, you want a woman who wants to do more than just sit on a throne and look pretty. You want a woman who cares more about being a reflection of God and a reflection of yourself rather than just worrying about her own reflection in the mirror. A woman like that will not only support you in your leadership, but she will lead with you in whatever manner God gives her. You will never have to worry about how things are when you're not around. She even makes you look good among your fellow servants. I think that's an underlying premise of the poetic picture of the perfect wife. In fact, as the writer wrapped up the description of this Wonder Woman, the king's mother says in verse 25, she is clothed with strength and dignity, and she laughs without fear of the future. When she speaks, her words are wise, and she gives instructions with kindness. She carefully watches everything in her household and suffers nothing from laziness. In other words, she's not self-centered. Nor does she do all of these things to seek glory and accolades. She doesn't need others to stroke her confidence. Her confidence is a reflection of her faith in God and knowing herself. She doesn't exude arrogance, but rather dispels wisdom with kindness. Even though she may know much from her life experiences, she's not a know-it-all when sharing this wisdom. She may look like $1 million, but only because she's savvy and has ingenuity. She may even have $1 million, but you never know it from her attitude or her actions and the way she presents herself with humility. Do you know people like that? People who are just wealthy, but you would never know it because they don't flaunt it. This is exactly the kind of woman she was talking about. There's a series of about 24 or more reality TV shows referred to as the Real Housewives of whatever city they live in. Honestly, I've never watched one of them, but I have seen the commercials. And from what I've seen on the commercials and read on the internet, it seems to be about women of affluence who flaunt their alleged outer beauty and the fact that they're rich and famous. But according to this poetic picture, a Proverbs 31 woman may indeed flourish as a woman, a wife, a mother, a business person, and many other things, but she never feels the need to flaunt it. She doesn't need to. Her sweetness and her kindness and her godliness speaks for herself. She doesn't need to find faults with other women or other people or put others down in order to elevate herself. And even though she may be worthy of a parade, and I would argue that all of you are, she would never parade herself. She never needs to remind others that she is a queen because it is self-evident. And even though she doesn't seek admiration, she lives in such a way that she is most definitely admired by those who count the most in her life. And that's the message of the closing verses of this chapter, beginning in verse 28. Her children stand and bless her. Her husband praises her. There are many virtuous and capable women in the world, but you surpass them all, he would say. Charm is deceptive, and beauty does not last, but a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised. Reward her for all that she has done. Let her deed publicly declare her praise. The Proverbs 31 woman is devoted to her family, devoted to creating an environment of love and support. Her children and her husband recognize her ability to foster strong relationships with those closer to her, ensuring that her home is a place of peace and love. She is dedicated to her community, and she contributes her giftedness, her wisdom, and anything else she can afford to be generous with. She's powerful, not because of superficial features or achievements, but because of an inner strength, because of integrity, ingenuity, humility, and her ability to inspire others, even and especially within her own household. That is true power. That is true humility. That is a Wonder Woman. Let's pray.